Thank you all for coming out. Hello and welcome to Brookline Booksmith. My name is Bonnie Adderstrom. I'm the Assistant Events Director and a bookseller here at the store. Today, it is of course a pleasure to host Emma Grove to celebrate her book, The Third Person, in conversation with Andy Ristaino.
Yeah.
Thank you. So in just a minute, I'm going to hand it off to the folks at MICE who are going to talk a little bit about their upcoming programming. But first, I do have a few housekeeping notes. So we'll get through the boring stuff real quick. Firstly, please keep your phones off or on silent for the duration of the event, and thank you for helping keep the event enjoyable for everybody. Secondly, copies of The Third Person will be available at that back counter for sale at the end of the event, so make sure to stop by if you'd like to grab a copy. And then it's important to note the event is being live streamed, so the audience isn't visible right now on the live stream, but if you don't want to be on YouTube, don't walk in front of the camera. And finally, we will have a Q&A at the end of the event, so please hold your questions until the end, but definitely have them ready. And a few thank yous. So, of course, a huge thank you to Andy and Emma for joining us today. Thank you to Tom for coming out to introduce them. Tom is the editor-in-chief of Drawn and Quarterly. We're excited to have him here all the way from Canada. A long way, so very great to have him here. And then finally, thank you to our co-sponsor / co-promoter partner in crime, MICE, the Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo. If folks watching either on the live stream or in the audience aren't familiar with MICE's work, it's very cool. Do check it out. You can follow them on social media at MassMice. That's MassMice. And perfect. I will hand it off to Zach to talk a little bit about MICE's upcoming programming. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I'm Zach Clemente with MICE, the Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo. We're happy to announce that we are returning to October, our normal show date. In a proper venue will be at Boston University at the 808 Gallery on Commonwealth Avenue, October 22nd and 23rd. It's going to be a wonderful time. We're really excited about opening up to a new venue where applications are for exhibitors are open literally right now for the next 2 weeks until May 31st, and it's going to be a really wonderful time. Please check out our website at micexpo.org for all the information about the show. And I'm going to hand it off to Tony.
Sir. Printed out my intro and promptly lost it, so I'm going to do that annoying phone thing. See how that goes. Thanks everybody. Thanks for coming. I wanted to talk a little bit about. I'm going to talk a little bit about Andy and Emma, and maybe a little bit personally about me and knowing them, because it just kind of makes sense that way. The fact that Andy and I know each other for a long time actually helped bring Emma to Drawn and Quarterly. So I'm pretty sure I met Andy at the Million Year Picnic where I used to work years and years ago. And he was one of many young cartoon hopefuls who would come into the store and we would chat. And he also went to RISD, where I had a number of friends who went there, and so we kept crossing paths over the years, especially at Comic-Con or other shows. Were there other shows? Maybe you said TCAF in Toronto. And we'd always check in with each other and say hi. But obviously, we hadn't seen each other in a while because of COVID, and I hadn't been to Comic-Con in a bit. And Andy texted me out of the blue and said, I have a friend who just completed a 900-page graphic novel. Would you take a look? So I always say yes, whether or not I want to look at somebody's 900-page graphic novel. So it took a little bit, but it came over, and I do read the things right away, and then pass them on to other people at the publisher for them to take a look and see what they think. And so I read like the first 100 pages of Emma's book, and the way I often do, thought like there's something happening here. This is kind of special, a rare thing. I don't know if anybody else here at the company is gonna like it. They're gonna consider this another Tom book, and we can't sell it or something. And so I handed it over to the publisher, who is my wife, Peggy, for her to read, maybe that evening, or maybe she just like after dinner she sat down to read the book, because she said, well, the way you described it, it sounds pretty great. And she didn't put it down, read the full 900 pages that night, read until like 2 a.m., and then I fell asleep, of course. And then in the morning she said, we definitely have to do this book. You don't need to show it to anybody else in the company. This is unbelievable. And I said, yeah, see, I told you. I told you it was great, and I told you you would love it. So I do truly believe, and I don't say this a lot. Of course, I'm not usually standing up here in front of an audience talking about a book in front of the author very often, but I do really believe that what Emma did with this book is particularly rare. I have glibly in the past said I don't care what a cartoonist writes about. I'm just interested in how they write about it. And honestly, Emma does do both. Like, Emma's formal mastery is fantastic, and the story itself is just great. Just hearing what it's about, you think like, well, I want to read that. So Emma really does deliver on both those counts. Third Person is like a comics version of an experimental theater piece where the director decides there's just going to be no set, and it's just going to be two actors pacing around torturing each other for like 8 hours. It is bracing, it's fascinating, it's infuriating. I guarantee you will cry at least 2 or 3 times during the whole book. I've never read anything like it, honest to God. It's really truly an amazing book, and this is Emma's first graphic novel. Yeah, I think you'll find out that there's some history behind that, but so in the end, we actually fast-tracked this book because we thought it was so amazing and people should see it as soon as possible. And I'm glad that it timed out that people can actually be here with us for the launch of Emma's book. So I'm going to turn things over to Andy and Emma, and they're going to chat like old friends about Emma's masterpiece, The Third Person. Take it away.
Well, I just wanted to say, I know that because of COVID, it's difficult for people to come out, so I appreciate everyone coming out and hearing me talk about the book.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Tom, and thanks to everyone coming out. Hey, Emma.
Hey.
How you doing?
It's good. Yeah, so yeah, just to throw this out there, yeah, as Tom mentioned, me and Andy have been friends for over 20 years.
Yeah, we both used to work in Watertown at a place called Olive Jar Animation.
Yeah.
That's how we met each other. And I used to live in Brighton, and I moved to San Francisco, and Emma moved into my room, actually.
Yeah, in Brookline?
Brighton.
Brighton, yeah. Yeah.
Kind of near Cleveland Circle.
Yeah, there was like a house that basically everyone at Olive Jar was, the Olive Jar animators were renting. Well, Olive Jar is out of business.
Yeah. But a lot of people out of, I went to Rhode Island School of Design, a lot of people out of there moved to Boston because it was close and worked at Olive Jar Animation for a while, but it was in existence. And Emma went to Mass Art.
Yeah, I went, a little ways down the road, Massachusetts College of Art, lived in, a little bit down the road from Mass Art, can't remember the name of the town, starts with a Q, I can't remember.
Quincy?
No,
No?
so it was like, I can't remember the name of it, but,
Okay.
yeah, like if you go down Huntington Avenue off of Mass Art and you take a left, there's
Yeah.
like a small little town, I lived there.
Okay.
But yeah, because I worked at Olive Jar, I lived everywhere. I lived in Alston, Brighton,
Yeah.
Brookline,
Yeah.
pretty much everywhere. Yeah, Olive Jar was like a little small commercial studio. They did like animated commercials, like Quick Bunny, things like
Yeah.
that. And eventually we all just kind of branched out. Andy, at one point me and Andy both went to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And then I stayed in LA for 2.5 years. When I finally got to Los Angeles, and then I think Andy was living in San Francisco doing the animation thing. When I finally got to Los Angeles, the industry had changed from hand-drawn animation to computers, and I just didn't have the training for computers, didn't want to do computers. I kicked around Los Angeles for 2.5 years, couldn't get work, so I
Yeah.
moved back east, and then basically gave up on animation. And just like, well, my old animation director, Rich, who said he was maybe going to try to be here, he got me a small job. He got me a job as an animator doing limited animation for a show on Adult Swim for Cartoon Network. And it was just, working in Flash was just so limiting, and I missed my paper and pencils.
Right.
So I basically, just after 2 months, I quit and never got an animation job again. And then just started getting into what I really wanted to do was just write. So I was writing screenplays, children's books, comics,
Yeah.
just a whole bunch of things, just trying to basically try to get something out there to basically get back into animation, because that was my first love. And then so basically this whole book, everything in it, there's nothing computer generated in it. It's not even photocopied.
Yeah.
There's no Photoshop, there's no After Effects, it's just all paper and pencils and ink pens. That's,
Yeah, and I think your love of drawing really shows, like, if you, we'll get into what the book's about, but it is all about dialogue and posing and action and like just kind of small nuances and motions and facial expressions, and it's so emotive and everything, and that I feel all comes from your love of animation, right?
The expressions, like, one thing it does, so just to get into the subject, I'll get into the subject matter in a minute, but I worried that because the subject matter is pretty dense, that maybe it was a little too cartoony, but the fact that the expressions were so broad and the gestures were so broad actually made it, I think it made it work, and people seem to be relating to the fact that it is so, the expressions are so vibrant.
Right.
Like when somebody's angry, they're really angry. When they're happy, they're really happy.
Right.
I think if I had drawn it more realistically, that would have toned down the vividness of the expressions, I
Yeah.
think. So, but yeah, maybe I should get into the subject matter.
Well, wait, let's talk about, since we're on art, let's talk about the art, just one more, and then we can go.
Sure.
But I just wanted to say something like, one thing that I think is really interesting is, most of the panels it's just like two heads, one person sitting in a chair and then a head really close to the camera. And I remember we talked on the phone a lot during the production of this book. And you would always talk about how you wanted people in the same panel to see what someone was saying and then how someone was reacting.
Right.
And, I think it was very important to give the audience everything. And I don't know if you want to talk more about that.
So I did find a way to frame it so that when two characters are talking, you can see the reaction of both characters.
Yeah.
But the framing was kind of, like my background in animation the staging was important.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be clear staging so that everything was clear, like you saw. And I basically wanted it to be very reader friendly, where I wanted it to have flow. So basically the entire book is real dialogue taken from real life. There's nothing made up in the book. The whole thing is completely factual. So I wanted it to have the flow and the pacing of real dialogue.
Yeah.
So that as you were flipping through it, it was almost like timed like real dialogue. Like
Right.
the act of reading it would take about the same exact time that it would take to say it.
Right.
Or
And
to,
do you think that, Emma's also someone who loves cinema and film and stuff, and do you think that's where that comes from? You wanted to recreate that?
and I think cinema, and also since a lot of it is two characters talking, a lot of it was like a play, because it mentions plays a lot in the book. So
Yeah.
I thought a lot about that. Like, what if this was a stage and you were watching a play?
Yeah.
of two characters just talking, and there was just no backdrop, just a black backdrop, just two characters
Yeah.
talking. What would that be like?
Right.
But
Yeah. Do you wanna talk a little bit about what the book is about?
yeah, so I should basically talk about what it's about a little bit. So
Yeah.
it's basically the gist of the book is the bulk of the middle of the book is this 6 month session, these 6 months of sessions that I had with this therapist. I changed his name in the book, but his name is Toby in the book. And basically about how I went to Toby initially to get approval for hormone replacement therapy because I'm transgendered, and throughout the course of the therapy what came out was that and he wouldn't tell me what it was about, and then it led to all this conflict and confusion that it came out that I had dissociative identity disorder, which is basically multiple personalities, and how he just could not approve me for the hormone therapy because of the dissociative identity disorder, and how that basically played out, and how the relationship between Toby and basically me and my two alters played out, and the relationship that he had between all three of us basically, because he had a very different experience with each of these. Like basically, this is me, this is Katina, and this is Ed. Those were my three parts that I had at the time, and basically, you know, the confusion of him. So there was one point, maybe I don't know if I want to give away too much of the book, but. Should I give away too much of it?
Well, I can, if you want.
I don't want to give
I
away
can
too much
stop
of
you.
the book.
I feel like with this book, you kind of probably know what it's about going into it, and it's just all about the dialogue and
Yeah.
kind of like I think one of the neat things about the book is it's like it's about your journey of understanding these parts of yourself, right?
Right.
And I mean, do you want to talk about that, like how?
Yeah.
Like, I'll just say one more thing. Like, you were dealing with living in a world where nothing was stable. Like, you would have blackouts where you didn't know what was happening,
Right.
and that had been going on for such a long period of time. Did you think that was like just the way life was, or like how? What did you?
Yeah, it did become normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like when I started seeing the therapist, like the memory losses, the people accusing me of things that I know I didn't say because one of my alters had said it. It all became normal. It became like when you cope with things, it just becomes the new normal, and you like start to assume that well everyone has parts to themselves. This is just everyone must be like this somehow.
Yeah.
You know, like when I was growing up, I just assumed that I assumed when I was a little kid that every guy out there must be miserable being a guy and must really want to be a girl.
Right.
And it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I finally asked a guy I'm like, man, doesn't it suck being a guy? Don't you hate it? And he's like, no, I love being a guy. It's great.
Right.
I'm like, oh, well, maybe something's different with me.
Right, but
But it becomes the new normal. Like
Yeah.
it just like your coping mechanism just that's how you function. And you don't see, like after a while, you don't see anything unusual with it.
yeah.
You know, it's and like you get used to, like if I would have, I didn't even know at the time that they were considered blackouts. I knew that I was losing time.
Uh-huh.
That like basically I could look at a clock and it'd be 2 o'clock, and then I'd blink my eyes or whatever, and then all of a sudden it was 5 o'clock. And I'm like, it became normal. It's like, and it was almost kind of neat.
Yeah.
It was almost kind of like, but you get used to things like people accusing you of things that you know you didn't say and things like that. You just get used to it, and
Right.
you learn. And like if you wake up in certain places and you don't remember how you got there, you just especially if you're a somewhat intelligent person, you can roll with it. You can
Yeah.
be like, all right, I'm here now. Oh, I know this person. I think I know where I am. Let me just figure out what where I am and what's going on, and then I'll just roll with it.
Right.
So one thing that, one theory about dissociative identity disorder is that it's a made-up thing that therapists and maybe even the patient is making up. But because it usually comes out in therapy sessions, but the reason that it comes out in therapy sessions is because with most people in your life, you can distract them, or you can run with it, or you can, or they're not paying that close enough attention to really figure it out.
Right.
But when you're in that closed space with a therapist over, I saw Toby for 6 months, you know, when you're just trapped there and you can't go anywhere and you can't distract them, then it becomes obvious.
Right.
So,
Right, and that's kind of like, the book is kind of like an unveiling of that mystery, like you're kind of a detective in the book.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so when the book I initially started writing was just a simple 160-page book about my transition from male to female, and then, but there was this 6-month period that was too confusing. I didn't want to write about it. I didn't want to think about it, and I was ashamed that I had an alter named Katina, and she maybe did some bad things, and I just didn't want to think about it. It was too confusing. The only thing I remembered from that time was bringing in a book to a therapy session, and then what I thought was a minute or two later, the book was just gone and it just vanished. I had no idea what happened to it. So I'm like, well, let me start there. Let me start with that session and just try to figure out what happened to that book. Why did it vanish? What was going on? And then I just started writing, and then the more I started writing about the dynamic between me and the therapist Toby, the more it just, I just found the dynamic of our relationship far more interesting than just talking about myself.
Right.
So you mentioned, being able to see both persons' reactions. Just being able to see what he was seeing helped me figure things out.
Right.
So when I started the book, actually, the first person I told people at the time that I was dissociative. A lot of people didn't believe me. Like, I had a girlfriend at the time, she didn't believe me. The therapist that I saw at the time for a while thought I was making it up, and I had no idea what he was accusing me of making up.
Yeah.
But when I started working on the book is actually the first time I told you that, I'm ashamed of this and I don't want to talk about it, but at one point I had dissociative identity disorder. And then I remember you asking me, well, what's dissociative identity disorder? And then I remember asking you, I'm like, well, do you remember Katina? And you're like, yeah, I remember Katina. I'm like, yeah, that was Alton.
Yeah.
That was, so then from that starting point, that's when I just started to write about the book. And the reason that it's so long is because it is just unedited, unfiltered dialogue. Just, there's maybe, I can count maybe a handful of sentences that I edited out just because they were repetitive. But the reason that it's so long is because it's just, there's no captions, there's no explaining anything. It's just straight dialogue. So I tried to, even though it's 900 pages, I tried to make it a very smooth, easy read for the reader, that it just, the big thing that I tried for in the book was just for it to have flow.
Yeah.
And if the pages weren't flowing and weren't reading easily and quickly, then they got changed.
Yeah.
So just how the pacing went, how the chapters flowed one into the other was important. I wanted it to have the pacing and real rhythm of real dialogue, because it was real dialogue taken from real life, and I made nothing up.
Mm-hmm.
So.
What made you decide to go on this journey into yourself and into your past?
Basically to figure out what happened.
Right. Yeah.
I had no idea, the 3-year process of this book, I was constantly talking to Andy, as basically, I consider Andy my best friend. So I was constantly talking to Andy about, as I was remembering things, they went in the book. So basically I was remembering things as I was writing them.
Mm-hmm.
There was one point where I was working full time at an office answering phones, and I remember this horrible thing my therapist said. I'm not going to give it away, but when I remembered it, I was just devastated, and I called Andy on my lunch break just crying. I'm like, how could he have said that? Why did he say that to me? And I still don't understand why he said some of the things. But basically the big part of the book is the therapeutic breakdown, that the relationship just broke down for many reasons.
Right.
But I do want to say that there is a positive. I did find another thing. I don't want to give it away, but it doesn't bash therapy in general. That this just wasn't a good fit for me and this therapist. But I did find another therapist that worked, and who did approve me for the therapy.
Yeah.
I don't want to give away too much, but the bulk of the book is about this confusion back and forth and conflict between me and Toby.
Yeah.
So, and him wrestling with literally 3 different people with their own outfits, their own memories, their own experience, their own personalities.
Yeah.
So, and just so being able to step outside of myself and see what, quite honestly, this poor guy was going through, just having to wrangle 3 people in one body and not knowing when they were going to switch over it made me. He did do some horrible things within the 6-month period, and said some horrible things, but being able to step outside of myself and see what he was going through, not only helped me therapeutically,
Right.
but it helped me to figure out, oh, this is what was going on.
Yeah, and I think making this book allowed you to get to the point where you're living full time
Yeah.
and you are like uh, me and Emma really would talk maybe once a week
Yeah.
for years and
Yeah.
for hours and so I've seen Emma get kind of herself back together, and it's been pretty amazing to be a part of, and to be there to be able to help you.
Yeah.
Know? So
Yeah. I mean, just having a friend to talk to just
Yeah.
helped me a lot. Just, so yeah, even just being able to like basically share with Andy, like, yeah, this is what I remembered and this is what's going in the book.
right,
What I like about having talked with you throughout the process of the book is you never told me what to do or how to do it.
yeah,
Your main, which is why everyone needs a good friend. But like his basically encouragement was just keep going.
Yeah.
Just keep doing it. Like, and I remember the first couple chapters that I showed you was the book chapter, the chapter where the book disappeared, and I remember like a good sign was that you read it quickly.
yeah.
And that you were like, laughing and like, some parts of the book are unintentionally hilarious. Like, even I'll admit that some
Yeah.
parts are hilarious.
Well, there's a lot of like, kind of like each character is having a different conversation than the person they're talking to, and so it's just like a lot of miscommunication.
A lot,
And,
yeah.
and it is fun. It's like a like a comedy.
Yeah.
Like
I mean, honestly, I couldn't make up half of the stuff. It's just honestly a lot of it is just so bizarre. I couldn't, even in my wildest imagination, I couldn't. If I didn't live through it, I never would have believed it. Like, just also just how the parts work, how they negotiated, how I negotiated, like just how you function when you have DID and
Right.
keep it secret and hidden from
from
pretty much everyone.
everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't. For me, it didn't really become a huge issue until I was in my 30s, and that's usually when parts are basically adult, fully formed, autonomous, independent, and then things start to get sticky because you basically have, 3 people going in 3 different directions, and
Yeah.
but yeah, it gets all into that in the book, but it also touches on. I think things are better now, but it touches on the discrimination against people with DID. Like, back then, especially if you wanted to get approved for hormone replacement therapy, you basically had to be the most healthy mentally person in the world,
Right.
healthy person in the world, and, no psychosis, no anything.
Right.
But I think now they're a little bit more realistic because living as a transgendered person and knowing from the earliest age that, you're a girl and you don't fit in with what people are telling you what you're supposed to be in society,
Yeah.
to think that that's not going to have some kind of mental effect on you is
Right. It's like
unrealistic.
the idea
It's
is
like-
the idea is like a way of like protecting yourself
Right.
from
It's-
the world around you.
Yeah, and it's also a coping mechanism.
Yeah. I guess that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, but it gets into there's other reasons that I just like, the book hints at. It used the color. I'm just going to turn this around a little. The color, basically black, is used throughout the book as a narrative device, and that was very intentional because basically the black signifies abuse, black for abusive people. So I used it when you see black in the book, it's very specific. So there was a lot of abuse that led to the DID also, but so the DID was actually, for me, it was a helpful coping mechanism to deal with being transgender, deal with the abuse that I couldn't escape from and I had no protector from. But over time it becomes maladaptive and it becomes troublesome.
Right.
So it gets all into that in the book.
Yeah. What do you when people read the book? What do you want them to take away from the book, or what do you want them to get from the book?
Well, when I started the book, I was actually looking for a book. There's a lot of autobiographies and biographies about people with DID, but I couldn't find one that showed graphically what it felt like.
Right.
So I think what I wanted to communicate to the reader is this is what it feels like. Like I was a salesperson for a little while at Sears. My manager always told me, he's like, people don't buy appliances based on knowledge, they buy it based on feeling.
Right.
So I'm like, if I can get them to feel the way this felt, then I think I've got something. So that was I think one of my main focuses in the book, was how can I get them to feel what it feels like so that they can share the experience.
Right.
So one thing I mentioned a lot in the book is just the act of storytelling. So I think one of the reasons that people are so drawn to stories in general, like why shows like Game of Thrones are so popular and The Sopranos, is because telling stories allows people to step outside of themselves, and if they're an empathetic, caring person, they're like, well, I can forget my own troubles and care about, even if they're fictional, I can live in this person's skin for a while, or feel what it feels like to be them, or get into their story. What are they doing? What are they feeling? And it helps you to figure things out about yourself.
Right.
You know, there's so many movies out there that when you see another person going through what you're going through or something similar, you know, like we just watched that movie the other night, A Fantastic Woman,
Right.
about the discrimination this wonderful strong transgendered woman is facing from pretty much 90% of the people.
Right.
But just being able to see somebody going through that, and basically there's things that awful things that people in the movie shouted at her that
Yeah.
I've actually had shouted at me, like,
Right.
you know, just awful, just hurtful things that discriminatory people against transgender
Right.
people have said to my face, and these are friends
Yeah.
and family and loved ones and sometimes strangers, but just to see somebody else going through that and coming out the other side
Yeah.
and just going through it with dignity and just surviving it, I think helped.
Right.
Today when I was talking with Andy a little bit about this today, there's this in the show Cheers, this is corny, but see, this gets into storytelling, why stories are important. So in the show Cheers, Frasier is dumped by Lilith, and then her new boyfriend, and then she dumps her boyfriend, and then, you know, he shows up at the bar and he wants to shoot everyone and shoot her and shoot himself, and Frasier looks at me, he's like, you know, he's like, I know what this is like. I've been through this, the heartbreak and the resentment and the betrayal. He's like, I was where you are, but I lived through it. I got through it, and so can you.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of my big motivations in writing the book, was if I could show people how bad things got, but that I came out the other side. It's
Right.
like, you know, I lived through this and I got through it, and so can you.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that it's not even specifically people with DID or transgendered people. I think everyone can relate to issues in the book, like issues of identity, people
Right.
wanting to put you in a box that you don't quite fit in, or, you know, being miscommunicated,
Right.
or, you know.
Right.
So I think there's universal things everyone can relate to.
Yeah. Definitely.
I'd like to think so anyway. So.
Yeah. I mean,
If you're,
is it time?
it's about
Is there
time.
anything else you want to talk about? Emma?
No, I can't think of anything.
Okay.
No, just that, like, the last thing I'll say about the book is there's a lot of, chaos, drama. There's a lot of bad things in the book. There's a lot of bad things that happen, but what I hope for the book is that at the end of the read, that it's a hopeful book for people. That, for me, the book is about healing.
Yeah.
It's not about, like, oh, look at how awful things are. It's really about hope and healing. And I think that a universal story that, like, the reason people like stories like Dumbo and things like
Right.
that is when they see how bad things can get, but that you can triumph and come out the other side.
Right. And I know there's a lot of dark things in the book, but there's also a lot of joyful things in the book, and I think you and your alters are portrayed in a way where they're very human and complicated, and you know, like Katina was, unless she was angry, she was very joyful.
Yeah.
You know, like, and I think Emma was too. You know, like there's a lot of passion in there, and I don't know. I don't think it's all bad. You know, like
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of everything, like ups and downs in the book.
And I think there's a lot of I think that the overall message of the book is positive.
Yeah.
I think that it's a hopeful,
For sure, definitely.
positive book. So.
Especially by the end of it.
Yeah, especially by the end. Yeah. So yeah, I guess that's it. Are we out of time?
It's Q&A time.
It's time for the Q&A. I'm grabbing the microphone so that if folks in the audience, I'll call on people. I am going to pass you the mic, and that is just so anyone watching on the live stream can hear your question and be able to continue to participate. But yeah, does anyone have any questions for Emma?
My publisher.
It is. It's your publisher.
How much does the book cost? Where can you buy it?
You had mentioned that you went through a couple of drafts.
Oh, yeah.
You had done the
Oh, yeah.
160-page draft that you that was very narrated, and then you decided that wasn't achieving kind of like the emotional resonance that you wanted, and
Right.
you had created, I think you said 1,200 pages, a
Yeah.
1,200-page version.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about your decisions and all that, and how long it took you, and how you went through the stages.
Yeah, I did worry that basically nobody would publish it because it's 900 pages. I actually thought at one point of breaking it into 3 books. But yeah, there was a 1,200-page version, and the most I could edit out was 300 pages. I tried to edit out more, and then when Andy showed it to you and Peggy, your wife, her and the editor tried editing it down. They're like, the ending doesn't work without, you need all of this. But yeah, I think the editing part, so basically what I did was I just kept writing, and then I had a stack of pages like literally this high, and then I'm like, all right, now I have to shape this into some kind of narrative. So I spent about 3 months editing, and then did more inking and more writing, and then another 3 months of editing just to the least editing that I had to do was the middle part, where it's just all therapy sessions because they're all chronological. But the first and the last parts of the book, it's broken up into 3 parts. So basically the first part of the book is really just setting up everything, and it's really just about a lot of confusion, like what's going on. The second part of the book is really about conflict, inner conflict within myself, conflict with the therapist. And then the third part of the book is really just clarity. It's really just enlightenment, where all the questions that were asked throughout the entire book are answered. So basically the last, I won't give it away, but the last part is like the big payoff, where all of the questions that were, and I set up a couple more questions at the beginning of but yeah, I did like Andy said, I did want to structure it a little bit like a mystery, because it was a mystery to me. I didn't know what happened, and I was figuring out as I was writing it. So I wanted the reader to experience a little bit of that as well, that, what's going on, like what's happening. And so basically as the reader is discovering it, it's basically in real time as I was discovering it myself. So, but yeah, everything in the book is factual. So. Yeah, editing it was difficult because it was factual. It's like, well, how do you take real life and edit it? But, so I couldn't really edit the chapters because what happened is what happened, but I could juggle in the third part, the order. And one thing I tried to, I'll just say this and I'll shut up, but one thing I did in the book was try to, because you're seeing things from literally 3 different perspectives, it's like I played around with that also, like if you see the same story, the same exact story, the same situation, the same time period, from a completely different perspective, at a completely different time, like how does that change your perception of it? Like for example, if you see us sitting here talking from my perspective, and then you rewind and then you show it from somebody else's perspective, how is that going to change the what's the word? The context of what you're seeing, and how does that change the meaning of what you're seeing? Just seeing things through other people's eyes just changes the context so drastically. I tried to get into that in the editing. So.
Amazing. Do we have any other audience questions? Just as a follow-up,
did you have those drafts as thumbnails, so you were like looking at it physically like as a book, or did you had it as script?
Well, because I'm an animator, I'm actually used to drawing very, 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 very quickly. When I was a teenager, I used to study what they call lightning sketchers in the 1930s, where these were master artists that could do a beautiful drawing in 30 seconds. So when I was actually writing the book, well, basically one thing I cover in the book, which I didn't get into in the interview, was the only way I found that I could remember what happened was to write it. I couldn't remember what happened in any other way for some bizarre reason. So what I did was I would just sit down with a big stack of paper and just start quickly writing out what happened, and then just doing like really, really quick sketches of the characters. Sometimes it would just be like a circle for the head and an eyeball and an arm. Or sometimes it would just be like the two characters' heads. Sometimes it would be the full figure. But so what I was doing was just tearing through these pages because I wanted to remember them before I lost them. So I was just writing and drawing super, super quickly. And what I found happened was there was a stream of consciousness going on where I tapped my unconscious, and all of the memories just kept flooding back. So when I was writing it, it was really just trying to write fast enough to remember as I was remembering it. It's like, oh wait, I remember this, and I'm just writing it. So then I basically just took those really, really, really rough, quick sketches, and a lot of them were really complete. Like I had to change very little so then what I would do is I basically just take that gigantic stack of quick sketches and then just go over them and just like fill in the bodies a little bit, maybe change the angle, fix things here or there. Just change like, oh, maybe this dialogue should be stretched out over 2 panels or 3 panels. You know, there was a pause here, things like that. So, but what you see in the book is pretty much not too far removed from the quick sketches, just cleaned up and inked, and the whole thing was done with a brush pen.
And just not to jump in, but to jump in, you create a lot of finished pages that you just cut out too. Like they're huge sections you spent a lot of time on, and an amazing amount of work was put in and then looked at and edited out.
Right.
You know, and that's really hard to do. What else I was going to... And you have very fascinating ways of working too, where you'll have the pages out and you'll like cut parts out and cut figures out and move them around, and it's really fascinating.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, the other way I remembered what happened in the book was like the cutting and pasting thing. So what I would do is like, because I could only remember in one go what one part remembered, so what I would do is I would sit down and remember everything I could as Emma for 1 session or 2 sessions, and then the parts that I couldn't remember, I would just draw a black panel. I'm like, I don't remember what happened here, and that's when I would switch to another part. And then I'd take a break for a couple of days, and then go back and remember everything I could as Katina, or everything I could as Ed, but I found that I could only remember them individually. I couldn't remember them,
right,
like, but, yeah, so basically if you see the roughs for this book, it's all cut in, it's like a gigantic jigsaw puzzle that I like, basically. But yeah, I love puzzles and crosswords and chess. So this book was a gigantic puzzle that I was trying to put together, which I finally put it together and figured it out. So as the reader discovers, I figured it out. Like, oh, as the reader, it's like, oh, now I figure out what happened. That's when I figured it out. So, but
So I have to mildly adjust my question because Shelley started it for me. But you talked, it's so fascinating to hear that you discussed this very internal process for the initial creation of the book. But then, especially earlier on in the conversation, I also brought it back multiple times, was the consideration for the audience, consideration for the reader, trying to really set a certain perspective and sort of like experience that a reader would get. I found that really fascinating, like really hard to hold in parallel, like when creating a work like that. Like, was there like what part of your process was it sort of like, did you really start pulling in what you wanted the reader to expect? Like where in that process did that start becoming really important to you?
well, I think that plays into being an animator and wanting things to be clear. Like, one thing Chuck Jones is the director that did the bulk of the Bugs Bunny cartoons in the 40s and 50s. He's considered like the best Bugs Bunny director ever. What he always said is they always asked him, it's like, do you do work for your audience? and what audience do you make it for? And he's like, no, I do my films for myself, but in making his work, he tries to make it clear and understandable. So he does the kind of films that he wants to do, but makes sure that the staging is clear, the animation is clear, the background is clear. Like when you look, like as an animator, you need to be able to look at, you don't have a lot of time as an animator, like so you need to be able to look at something and within a second know exactly what's happening in that scene. Andy is actually a storyboard artist, character designer. He's worked on Adventure Time, so he knows what it's like as a storyboarder. Like things have to be clear. So as far as what I write about, I write for myself, and I wrote the book that I wanted to write. I wrote the book that I wanted to see, but as far as like, you know, being able to step back and saying like, is this readable? Is this clear? I think that's, you know, that just comes from being an animator and wanting things to communicate quickly and easily for the audience.
We do have time for one or two more questions, so if folks have more. I also have a question, if I'm allowed. If I want to prioritize you guys, so if you have one, go ahead. All right, I'm gonna be selfish and ask my question then. So, hearing you describe your process and your background in animation, and you talked about like your love of film, I think it's clear, like in the book itself. I've only just started reading it, but I was wondering if you also had a background or any particular like love for theater or drama, because there is something that, at least to me as a theater nerd, feels very much. It has the intimacy of like a black box show where you're watching like, I mean, Tom talked about this too. You're watching like two incredible actors like locked in with each other. I was just curious if you had any interest or background in theater.
Yeah, I actually I never got around to it because my real passion was film, but I always did want to attempt to write a play. But when I was going to college, I was really into plays, and I loved seeing plays. Like, you know, if I was going on a date or just having a night out, I'd always see a play. When I went to Hoyok Community College in Massachusetts, and I took the most, you know, even though it was a community college, I actually learned more at community college than I did at Master College of Art, because you get more, because they're trying to prepare you for a 4-year college. So I took the most advanced literature class that they could, and we had this professor that I'll never forget. She was so amazing, Gloria Cromwell. And at the time, I was doing a lot of children's books. I was a big Arthurian nut. She clued me into science fiction. She was a big science fiction nut, but anything she suggested, I read. I read so much in that semester. She was amazing, and she was really big. She read everything: poems, plays, science fiction, literature, anything and everything. And she really encouraged us to see plays and watch plays. And you know, we were reading you know, one of the plays that she had us read was Tartuffe. You know, so in my literature class we read a lot of plays. So yeah, I definitely did think about that. When I was writing the book a lot, I thought about like, well, what if this was structured like a play, but with real characters and real dialogue. But another big influence, honestly, as far as dialogue, was Hemingway. One of my favorite books when I was growing up was The Sun. Sorry if we're talking.
No.
But one of my favorite books growing up was The Sun Also Rises, and I loved how Hemingway uses very little description. He can describe in 2 sentences or a paragraph what it would take a novice writer 3 pages to describe. Like, I've read books where it's pages and pages of description. But Hemingway could, in 2 sentences, sum up not only what this room encompassed, but what it felt like to be in that room. Like, there's this Hemingway short story where he talks about 2 friends coming in from skiing, and he's like, he says something like, you know, the tables were damp from wine, and the room was dark in the back. In 1 sentence, you not only get, it's almost like you can feel and smell the room. So one of the things I liked about Hemingway in The Sun Also Rises in particular was the book is mostly just straight dialogue. He gives very little character description. It's all just, you figure out who the characters are from what they're saying. he does describe a little bit what Lady Brett Ashley looks like, but he gives no description of what anyone else looks like. But just through their dialogue and what they're saying, you have a vivid memory in your mind of, like, I have a feeling of what Bill looks like, and I have a feeling of what, his friend Harry Cohn looks like. So, and I think in this book I wanted to push that further. I'm like, well, what if I could do a book that was no description at all, straight dialogue. So basically that's the book I wanted to read. Like,
Amazing.
so, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was an excellent answer. Does anyone else have any more questions? All right. Well, incredible. I don't know about y'all, but I had a great time tonight. Let's hear it
Yeah,
one more
thanks for
time
coming out.
for Emma Grove and Andy Ristaino.
Thank you for